These 40 experiments will mess with your mind. Some were genius, others pure evil. But all of them changed psychology forever. Stanford Prison Experiment was conducted by Dr. Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University in 1971. Zimbardo turned the basement of Stanford Psychology building into a mock prison. He recruited 24 male college students and randomly assigned them to be either guards or prisoners. He planned to run it for 2 weeks to study the psychological effects of perceived power. The guards quickly became abusive, humiliating, and controlling toward the prisoners. The prisoners became anxious, depressed, and submissive. It got so real that one prisoner had a mental breakdown. They had to shut the whole thing down after just 6 days. It got way out of control. It showed how easily ordinary people can fall into toxic roles when given power and a system that allows it. It's often used to explain real-world cruelty, like in prisons or even Nazi Germany. Zimbardo himself, the lead psychologist, got so into his role as the prison superintendent that he didn't realize how bad it had gotten until an outsider called him out. Milgram Obedience Study. The Milgram experiment was done by psychologist Stanley Milgram at Yale University in 1961. He wanted to see how far people would go when obeying authority, even if it meant hurting someone else. So here's how it worked. Participants were told they were part of a study on memory. They were the teacher, and another person, actually an actor, was the learner. Every time the learner gave a wrong answer, the teacher had to give them an electric shock, increasing the voltage each time. Now here's the twist, the shocks weren't real. But the participant thought they were. And the learner, the actor, would scream, beg to stop, even pretend to pass out. And still, many people kept going just because the guy in a lab coat said, "Please continue." Some went all the way to the max, 450 volts, just because they were told to. It shocked the world. Milgram showed how ordinary people could do terrible things if they're following orders from authority. The results were disturbing, especially coming so soon after the Holocaust. It made people ask, would I do the same? Little Albert Experiment. This one's pretty wild and honestly kinda messed up. It was done by John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner in 1920. They wanted to see if they could condition a baby to develop fear. Yep, they literally tried to scare a baby for science. So they took this 9-month-old baby, known as Little Albert, and first showed him a bunch of things: a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, even masks. At first, Albert wasn't scared of any of it. Then they started the real experiment. Every time Albert reached for the white rat, they made a loud, terrifying noise behind him, like banging a metal bar. Naturally, Albert got startled and upset. After repeating this a few times, guess what? Albert started crying just from seeing the rat. No noise needed. Eventually, he was scared of anything white and fluffy: rabbits, dogs, even fur coats. So yeah, they basically created a phobia. The point was to prove that fears can be learned, not just something you're born with. And it worked. But the ethics? Super questionable. Especially since little Albert was never deconditioned. They just left him like that. The Asch Conformity Experiment. This one is all about peer pressure and how people will go along with the crowd even when they know the crowd is wrong. It was done by Solomon Asch in 1951. He brought people into a room and told them it was a vision test. In each round, participants had to match the length of a line to one of 3 comparison lines. Easy, right? But here's the catch: the participant was placed in a group with several other people, and everyone else in the room was secretly in on the experiment. During the first few rounds, the group gave the right answers. But then they all intentionally started giving the wrong answer out loud. And the real participant? They just sat there, hearing one wrong answer after another. And here's what's crazy: about 75% of participants conformed at least once. Even though the right answer was obvious, they didn't want to be the odd one out. Some said they doubted themselves, others just didn't want to go against the group. It showed just how powerful social pressure is. People would rather be wrong with the group than right by themselves. The Bobo doll experiment. This one's a classic, and it's all about how kids learn by watching. It was done by Albert Bandura in 1961, and it involved a big inflatable clown doll called, Bobo. Here's the setup. Kids watched a video of an adult acting aggressively toward the Bobo doll. Like punching it, kicking it, hitting it with a hammer, saying mean stuff. Total chaos. Then the kids were taken into a playroom with, guess who? Bobo. And yeah, they copied the exact same behavior. Same punches, same words, same aggression. Some even got creative and added new moves. What Bandura proved was huge. Kids imitate what they see, especially from adults. It wasn't just about learning rules, it was observational learning. Monkey see, monkey do. The experiment played a big role in debates around violent media. Like, if kids watch violence on TV, will they act more violently in real life? According to Bobo. Maybe. The Marshmallow Test. So this one sounds cute at first, but it ended up saying a lot about self-control, success, and even your future. It was run by Walter Mischel at Stanford in the early 70s. Here's how it went down. A kid is left alone in a room with one marshmallow on the table. The adult says, you can eat this now or wait 15 minutes and I'll give you a second one. Then the adult leaves. And the kid is left in pure mental torture. Some kids gave in fast, no shame, just chomp. Others tried everything to resist, covering their eyes, singing to themselves, playing with their hands, even sniffing the marshmallow like weirdos, and some actually waited the whole time. But the real twist? Years later, they followed up with those kids. Turns out, the ones who waited? They did better in school, had higher SAT scores, healthier relationships, and more success in general. So the takeaway? Self-discipline and delayed gratification equals big life advantages. Even at 4 years old, that little marshmallow told a big story. The Rosenhan Experiment. This one exposed the entire psychiatric system, like straight up embarrassed it. It was led by David Rosenhan, a psychologist who basically asked, how good are hospitals at telling who's actually mentally ill? So he and 7 other totally sane people pretended to have one symptom. They said they were hearing voices saying words like empty, hollow, and thud. That's it. No other signs. And guess what? All of them got diagnosed with serious mental disorders, mostly schizophrenia, and were admitted to psychiatric hospitals. Once inside, they dropped the act and acted completely normal. But nobody believed them. Staff saw everything they did as part of their illness. One person was even noted as having obsessive writing behavior when he was literally just taking notes for the study. Some of them were stuck in there for weeks. The longest? 52 days. And here's the plot twist. After the study was published, one hospital said that would never happen here. So Rosenhan said, cool. I'll send some fake patients your way, you spot them. That hospital later flagged 41 people as fakes. Rosenhan? He hadn't sent anyone. It showed how broken and subjective psychiatric diagnosis could be. After this, the whole field had to take a long, hard look in the mirror. The Monster Study, 1939. Yeah, the name says it all, and sadly, it's not just for shock value. This one was conducted by Wendell Johnson and his team at the University of Iowa in 1939. And what they did was honestly heartbreaking. So here's the deal, they wanted to see if stuttering was something you're born with or if it could be taught. To test this, they used orphans, actual orphan children, some of whom already stuttered and others who didn't. The group was split into 2. One half was praised for speaking well, encouraged, and reassured. The other half? They were belittled, told they were speaking wrong, and made to feel anxious about every little slip-up. And here's the thing, some of the kids in the negative group didn't even stutter to begin with. But after being criticized constantly, they became self-conscious, withdrawn, and some actually developed speech problems that lasted for life. That's why it's called the Monster Study, not because the kids were monsters, but because the researchers acted like them. It's one of the darkest examples of how psychological experiments can seriously mess people up, especially vulnerable children. And yeah, ethics? Totally out the window on this one. Next up is number 9. It's about how fast people can turn against each other when they're split into groups. Ready? You got it. This next one is like watching Lord of the Flies unfold in real life. The Robbers Cave Experiment, 1954. This one was all about group conflict and how easily it can be created and resolved. It was run by Muzaffar Sharif, a social psychologist who basically set up summer camp as a psychological battleground. Here's what he did. He brought 22 boys, around 11 years old, to a summer camp in Oklahoma, but they didn't know they were part of a study. He split them into 2 groups and kept them apart for the first week. Each group formed their own identity. They made flags, came up with names, the Rattlers and the Eagles, and built tight bonds. Then, he introduced the groups to each other and sparked competition. Tug of war, baseball, treasure hunts, and the prize? Real rewards. Things got ugly fast. Name-calling, food fights, vandalism. Some boys even raided the other group's cabin. Full-on camp chaos. But here's the cool part. Sharif wanted to fix the conflict too. He gave them superordinate goals, like fixing a broken water supply or pulling a stuck truck. Things that required both groups to cooperate. Slowly but surely, the hate faded, and the boys actually started getting along. So what did it prove? That conflict isn't about the people, it's about the situation. And shared goals can bring even the most divided groups back together. Basically, how to start and solve a war with Mores. Wanna keep going? Number 10 is a weird one. It shows how just watching people changes how they act. Let's jump into. This one low-key changed how all research is done today. The Hawthorne Effect 1920s 30s. Alright, this one happened at the Hawthorne Works, a big old factory near Chicago. Researchers were studying how to make workers more productive. So they tried changing stuff like lighting, break times, and work hours to see what worked best. Here's the twist. No matter what they changed, brighter lights, dimmer lights, more breaks, fewer breaks, productivity went up. Even when they reversed the changes, workers kept performing better. Why? Because the workers knew they were being observed. They weren't working harder because of the changes, they were working harder because someone was watching. This became known as the Hawthorne Effect, when people temporarily changed their behavior just because they know they're being studied. It was a big deal. Suddenly, psychologists and scientists had to ask, are our results real? Or are people just putting on a show because they know they're in an experiment? It also made employers rethink how observation affects performance. So next time your boss strolls by your desk and you magically become more productive, yeah, that's the Hawthorne Effect. You down for number 11? It's a biblical-level plot twist about how people can ignore someone in need even when they're studying morality. You're gonna love this one. It's got irony, urgency, and a little dose of human nature gone wrong. The Good Samaritan Experiment, 1973. So this one was run by John Darley and Daniel Batson at Princeton University. And the setup? Absolute poetic cruelty. They recruited seminary students, yep, future priests and pastors, and told them to walk across campus to give a speech. Some were even told their topic was, wait for it, the parable of the Good Samaritan. You know, the Bible story where a man helps a stranger in need? But here's the twist. On the way to their speech, each student passed by an actor slumped in a doorway, coughing, groaning, clearly in distress, like, obviously needed help. And what did the students do? Well, it depended on one thing, how much of a hurry they were in. If they were told, you're late, hurry, most of them walked right past. If they had time, they were way more likely to stop and help. Some literally stepped over the guy while on their way to talk about compassion and helping others. The irony was chef's kiss. The experiment showed how our actions aren't always guided by morals or beliefs. Sometimes we're just too busy. It's not about being a good person. It's about having the space to be one. Number 12 coming up? It's emotional, fuzzy, and absolutely heartbreaking. Monkeys involved. Harlow's Monkey Experiments, 1958. This one was done by Harry Harlow, and it's about one of the deepest human needs, love and comfort. But instead of humans, he studied baby monkeys, and what he found was devastatingly real. So here's what he did. He took baby rhesus monkeys away from their mothers and gave them 2 fake moms to choose from. One was made of wire and had a bottle with milk. The other was soft and fuzzy, but had no food. Logic would say they'd cling to the one with milk, right? Nope. The monkeys clung to the soft, cuddly one for hours. They only went to the wire one when they were starving. The second they were done, they rushed back to the soft one, hugging it like it was their real mom. Harlow even put them in stressful situations like scary toys or loud noises, and guess what? The monkeys ran straight to the soft mom for comfort. It proved something huge. Emotional security is more important than physical needs. We don't just want food or safety. We want connection. But it gets darker. The monkeys raised without any comfort at all. They grew up socially broken. They couldn't form bonds, they didn't know how to mate. Some became violent. Others just curled up in corners. It showed how powerful and necessary love really is, even for monkeys. You ready for number 13? This next one's got babies, glass tables, and a cliff that's not really a cliff. But your brain doesn't know that. The Visual Cliff Experiment, 1960. This one was run by Eleanor Gibson and Richard Walk, and it asked a super interesting question: are we born with a fear of heights, or do we learn it? So here's what they did. They built something called a visual cliff. It was a glass platform with a checkered pattern underneath. On one side, the pattern was right under the glass. But on the other, it dropped off, so it looked like a cliff even though the glass was solid all the way through. Then they placed babies on the shallow side and had their moms call them from the deep side. And what happened? Most of the babies refused to crawl over the glass cliff. Even though it was physically safe, their brains told them, nope, that's a drop. Not today. What does it mean? It suggests that the fear of falling, or at least the depth perception that leads to it, is built in, not just something we pick up through experience. So yeah, even tiny humans have some pretty smart survival instincts. Also, babies are way smarter than they look. Ready for number 14? It's about how your brain can lie to you and literally make up memories that never happened. The False Memory Experiment, 1995. This one was led by Elizabeth Loftus, and it basically proved that your memory, yeah, it's not as trustworthy as you think. Here's what she did. Loftus asked people to recall events from their childhood. Most were real, like getting lost at the mall or going to a birthday party. But here's the catch: one of the stories was completely made up. In one version, the fake memory was something like, remember when you got lost in the mall as a kid and a nice old man helped you? At first, people were like, no, I don't remember that. But after a little nudging and retelling, they started to remember it. They described the man, the store, how they felt. Full-on detailed scenes of something that never happened. It was wild. Loftus showed that our memories can be manipulated, not just blurred, but completely invented. Why does that matter? Because it raises big questions about things like eyewitness testimony, repressed memories, even how we see ourselves. Your brain isn't a recording device. It's a storyteller, and sometimes it adds extra chapters. Want to keep going to number 15? It's one of the most iconic mind tricks ever, and you've probably fallen for it without even realizing it. You're gonna love this one. It's sneaky, funny, and totally messes with your brain. The Invisible Gorilla Experiment, 1999. Alright, this one's a classic, and it was created by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons to test something called selective attention. Here's how it worked. Participants were shown a short video of people passing basketballs around. They were told, count how many times the players in white passed the ball. Simple, right? So everyone watches the video, counting the passes, super focused. But here's the wild part. Right in the middle of the video, a person in a full gorilla suit walks through the scene, stops, beats their chest, then walks off. You'd think it's impossible to miss. But guess what? Over half the people didn't see the gorilla at all. Like, not even a flicker of wait, was that a gorilla? Why? Because their attention was so locked in on the ball passes, their brain literally filtered the gorilla out. It proved something huge. We think we see everything. But in reality, we only see what we're focused on. Everything else? Invisible. It's a perfect reminder that our perception of reality? It's selective and very easy to trick. You want me to hit you with number 16? This one's raw. A baby plus blank face equals emotional chaos. Let's dive into number 16. It's simple, short, but emotionally brutal. The Still Face Experiment, 1975. This one was done by Dr. Edward Tronick, and if you've ever doubted how emotionally tuned in babies are, this'll change your mind real quick. Here's what he did. a mother sits in front of her baby, maybe around 1 year old. At first, she interacts normally, smiling, talking, responding to the baby's gestures. The baby's happy, cooing, pointing, they're vibing. Then suddenly, the mom goes completely still. No emotion. No reaction. Just a blank face like a statue. And the baby? At first, they try to get her attention, smiling, pointing, making noises. Then they get confused. Then upset. Then full-on distressed. Some cry, squirm, even scream just from a few seconds of emotional disconnection. What does it show? Babies are wired for connection. Even at that young age, they crave emotional feedback, facial expressions, eye contact, attention. When it's suddenly gone, it's devastating. This experiment revealed how crucial those tiny emotional exchanges are in building trust, safety, and early attachment. So yeah, never underestimate how deeply babies feel. You ready for number 17? We're going old school for this one, with cats, cages, and the earliest roots of behaviorism. Let's rewind to the OG days of psychology, before monkeys, before marshmallows. This is where the science of behavior really kicked off. The Puzzle Box, 1898. This one was cooked up by Edward Thorndike, one of the earliest psychologists to mess around with learning and behavior, and he used cats to do it. Not gonna lie, it's kind of adorable. So here's the setup. He built these wooden puzzle boxes with levers, strings, or buttons that would unlock a door. Then he'd stick a hungry cat inside with some food waiting just outside the box. The first time in, the cat would freak out a little, scratching, meowing, stumbling around, until eventually it accidentally hit the right lever or string and got out. But here's where it gets interesting. Thorndike put the same cat back in the box over and over again. Each time, the cat escaped faster and with less random behavior. Why? Because it was learning through trial and error. Every time it got the result it wanted, freedom plus food, it remembered what worked and dropped what didn't. This led to what Thorndike called the law of effect. Behaviors followed by good outcomes are more likely to happen again. Behaviors followed by bad outcomes? Not so much. It basically laid the groundwork for everything from operant conditioning to dog training to how your brain gets addicted to TikTok. The Elevator Experiment, 1962. Okay, this one's short but iconic, and it shows just how far we'll go to fit in, even when it makes zero sense. It was done by Candid Camera, yeah, the old prank show, but it's been used in psych classes ever since. Here's how it went down. A guy walks into an elevator thinking everything's normal. But secretly, everyone else inside is in on it. And they're all facing the back wall. Not the doors. Just awkwardly staring at the wrong direction. The unsuspecting guy looks confused for a second, then slowly but surely he turns to face the back too. No one said a word. No pressure. No threat. Just social cues. And that was enough to make him copy the weirdest, most illogical behavior. That's the power of social conformity. We're wired to mirror the group even if the group is doing something straight up dumb. It's funny but also kind of deep. We like to think we're independent, but often, we just go with the flow. So next time you're in an elevator and feel weird facing forward when everyone else is backwards, now you know why. Twin studies. Okay, this one isn't just a single experiment, it's a whole category of research that's been going on for decades. And the question it tries to answer is one of the biggest ever. What shapes who you are, nature or nurture? So here's what researchers did. They studied identical twins, some raised together, some raised apart, to figure out how much of your personality, intelligence, mental health, and behavior comes from your genes versus your environment. And the results? Kind of mind-blowing. Even when raised in completely different families, identical twins often had similar tastes, chose similar careers, scored closely on IQ tests, had the same quirks or habits, even named their pets similar things. There's one famous case where twins separated at birth both became firefighters, married women named Linda, divorced them, then married women named Betty, and named their sons James Allen. Bro, what? Twin studies showed just how strong genetic influence can be. But they also revealed where nurture kicks in, especially with things like values, religion, or language. So yeah, the answer to nature versus nurture is both. But twins proved nature's got a louder voice than we thought. The Learned Helplessness Experiment, 1967. This one was run by Martin Seligman, and it's honestly heartbreaking, but it uncovered something super important about depression, trauma, and why people sometimes just give up. Here's what he did. He put dogs into harnesses and gave them mild electric shocks. Some dogs could stop the shocks by pressing a panel. Others, no matter what they did, the shocks kept coming. And after a while, those dogs just stopped trying. They learned that they were helpless. Then came the second part. All the dogs were placed in a new setup, a box they could easily escape from if they jumped over a little barrier. The dogs that had control before, they escaped right away. But the dogs that had been helpless, they didn't even try. They just laid down and took it. It was brutal, but it showed something huge. If people are exposed to constant failure, pain, or trauma, and feel like nothing they do matters, they stop trying even when escape is possible. This idea, learned helplessness, helped psychologists understand not just animal behavior, but also human depression, abusive relationships, and why people sometimes stay stuck in bad situations. Seligman later shifted gears and became one of the founders of positive psychology, trying to figure out how to help people recover and thrive again. So yeah, the lesson, hope, control, and belief in change aren't just nice ideas, they're everything. The Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes Experiment, 1968. This one didn't happen in a lab. It happened in a third-grade classroom in Iowa, and it shook the world. Right after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, schoolteacher Jane Elliott wanted to teach her students what racism feels like, not just what it means. So she split the class by eye color, blue-eyed kids on one side, brown-eyed on the other. Then she told them blue-eyed people are smarter, better, cleaner. They get extra privileges today. And just like that, the mood shifted. Within minutes, the blue-eyed kids started acting superior. The brown-eyed kids got quiet, nervous, unsure of themselves. Fights broke out. Friendships cracked. Grades even dropped overnight. Then the next day, she flipped it. Brown eyes were now better, and the roles reversed. Same results. The point? Prejudice isn't born. It's taught. And once it's in the system, it spreads fast. Jane Elliott's simple, powerful classroom experiment showed that discrimination can be manufactured in a heartbeat, and that empathy? It's something we have to learn just as intentionally. All right, let's jump into number 22, where just one word changed how people remembered an entire event. The Car Crash Study, 1974. This one's another classic from Elizabeth Loftus, the queen of memory experiments. And it proves that what you say can literally change what people remember. Here's what she did. Participants watched a short video of a car crash, nothing too wild, just a basic collision. Then she asked them a simple question: how fast were the cars going when they blank each other? But here's the twist: different groups got different verbs: smashed, collided, bumped, hit, contacted. And the results? People who heard smashed gave way higher speed estimates than those who heard bumped or hit. Some even remembered broken glass, even though there was none in the video. Why? Because our memories aren't hard drives. They're fragile, malleable, influenced by suggestion, context, and even tone. This study showed that eyewitnesses can be manipulated not on purpose, but just by how a question is phrased. So yeah, next time someone asks, "Are you sure you remember it like that?" maybe the answer is, "I thought I did." Want to roll into number 23, the broken window theory next. It's gritty, urban, and super controversial in real-world law enforcement. Let's do it. This next one takes us straight to the streets and shows how one broken window can spiral into full-blown chaos. The broken window theory, 1982. This one wasn't your typical experiment in a lab. It was more like a social observation turned crime theory. Psychologists James Q. Wilson and George Kelling came up with it in the early 80s, and here's the basic idea. If you leave a window broken in a building and nobody fixes it, people assume no one cares. And that invites more crime, more vandalism, more disorder. So it starts small. A bit of graffiti, trash on the sidewalk, someone jumping a subway turnstile. And then suddenly, you've got full-blown chaos. Their theory said, visible signs of neglect create an environment where people feel like the rules don't matter. It's not the big crimes. It's the small stuff that sets the tone. Cities like New York actually adopted this as a strategy. Cops crack down hard on minor offenses, broken windows, subway fare evasion, graffiti, hoping to prevent bigger crimes. And it kind of worked, but it also got controversial. Critics said it led to over-policing, especially in marginalized neighborhoods. So now it's one of those theories that sits right on the edge of smart policy. And slippery slope. Either way, it changed the way cities think about crime, community, and what happens when things look like no one's in control. Want to hit number 24 now? It's about how we think everyone's watching us. But really, this next one is all about that cringe feeling when you think everyone's looking at you. But they're probably not. The spotlight effect, 1999. Ever walk into a room and feel like everyone's staring at your outfit, or that pimple, or that one weird thing you just said? Yeah, that's the spotlight effect. And in 1999, Thomas Gilovich and his team ran an experiment to prove it's all in our heads. Here's what they did. They made participants wear a super embarrassing t-shirt, think Barry Manilow's face printed big across the front. Then they had them walk into a room full of strangers. Afterward, they asked, "How many people do you think noticed your shirt?" Most guessed about 50% of the room did. But in reality, only around 20% noticed. Why? Because people aren't thinking about us nearly as much as we think they are. We all live in our own main character moment, and everyone else is just busy starring in their own movie. Next time you're overthinking what you said, wore, or did, just remember, the spotlight is mostly in your mind. Want me to jump into number 25? It's one of the deepest moral mind benders ever, the infamous trolley problem. Let's go into the ethics war zone. This next one is where philosophy crashes straight into psychology and nobody walks away clean. Trolley problem experiments. Alright, this one isn't tied to a single year or researcher, it's been used and tested in tons of ways over time. But the core idea? Simple and brutal, a runaway trolley is heading toward 5 people tied to the tracks. You can pull a lever to switch it to another track. But there's one person tied to that track. So the question is, would you pull the lever? Sacrifice one to save 5? Or do nothing and let fate take its course? Sounds theoretical, right? But researchers actually tested this with real choices, no actual deaths, obviously grinning face with sweat, and people were split, some based on logic, utilitarian, others based on emotion or moral beliefs. But it gets worse the more you tweak it. What if instead of pulling a lever, you had to push a person off a bridge to stop the trolley? Same math, save 5, sacrifice 1, but way fewer people were willing to do it. Turns out, we're way more comfortable with indirect harm than direct action. This experiment blew open how messy moral decision-making is. It's not just about logic, it's emotion, personal values, guilt, even how close we are to the victim. The trolley problem became so iconic it's basically a meme now. But underneath that, it still asks the darkest question. What kind of person are you when someone else's life is on the line? Want to dive into number 26 next? It's the one that proves most of us think everyone agrees with us when they totally don't. This next one hits that ego right in the face. False consensus effect, 1977. Okay, so you ever post something online thinking everyone's gonna agree with this, and then boom, half the comments are calling you delusional? That's the false consensus effect. It was first studied by Lee Ross, David Greene, and Pamela House in 1977, and the idea is this: we tend to overestimate how much other people share our beliefs, opinions, and choices. Here's what they did. They gave participants a simple moral dilemma like choosing whether to do something slightly shady. Then, after making their choice, they asked, what do you think most people would choose? And what do you think of the people who didn't choose like you? The answers? Most people assumed others would do the same as them. And when they didn't, they judged them more harshly. It's like our brains want to believe our opinions are the default setting for humanity. But in reality, we live in bubbles, social, cultural, algorithmic. And the world is way more diverse in thought than we assume. This effect explains so much, from political arguments to online rage to why your friend doesn't get why you love pineapple on pizza. You want me to slide into number 27 next? It's about why building stuff yourself makes you love it more even if it kinda sucks. The IKEA Effect. This one's hilarious and so relatable, and it comes from Michael Norton, Daniel Mochon, and Dan Ariely. They wanted to know, why do we love stuff we make ourselves, even if it's kinda bad? So they had people build super simple things like IKEA furniture, origami frogs, even paper boxes. Then they asked, how much would you pay for this? And then, how much do you think someone else would pay? And guess what? People overvalued their own creations by a lot. Even when their origami looked like it got chewed up by a dog. They called it the IKEA effect. When we put effort into something, we value it more, not because it's great, but because it's ours. It's the same reason you're weirdly attached to that ugly PowerPoint you made at 3 a.m. You defend your half-finished DIY project like it's a work of art. And yeah, why building IKEA furniture makes you feel like a damn architect. Marketers love this effect. That some assembly required thing? It's not just for shipping. It makes you love the product more. Because effort equals ownership. And ownership equals value. Ready for number 28? This one is psychological gymnastics when your actions don't match your beliefs. Your brain panics. Let's get into the brain-bending magic of self-justification, where your brain basically says, we meant to do that. Cognitive Dissonance Study, 1959. This one's a classic done by Leon Festinger and James Carlsmith, and it reveals just how far we'll go to stay mentally comfortable. Here's what happened. Participants were asked to do a super boring task, like turning pegs on a board for an hour. Mind-numbing stuff. Then, after finishing, they were asked to lie to the next participant and say that was actually really fun. But here's the twist, some were paid $20 to lie. Others? Just $1. Afterward, they were asked, so how fun was the task, really? And here's where it gets wild. The people who were paid $1 ended up saying they actually enjoyed the task more than the ones paid $20. Why? Because their brain couldn't justify the lie with just $1. So it did something sneaky, it rewrote the memory. I wasn't lying. I must have actually kinda liked it. This is called cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable feeling when your actions don't match your beliefs. And instead of changing your behavior, your brain often changes your belief. It explains everything from buyer's remorse to staying in bad relationships to defending terrible decisions just to avoid saying, I was wrong. Ready for number 29? It's about how we treat our stuff like gold just because it's ours, even if it's literally a coffee mug. Let's get into that mine equals valuable mindset. This one is short, simple, and way too real. The Endowment Effect, 1990. This one comes from psychology legends Daniel Kahneman, Jack Knetsch, and Richard Thaler, and it goes like this: we value things more just because we own them. Here's what they did. They gave people a random coffee mug, nothing fancy, just a basic office mug. Then they asked, how much would you sell this for? And asked others, how much would you pay to buy it? And the people who owned the mug wanted way more than the people who didn't. Why? Because ownership changes perception. As soon as it's yours, it's worth more. And this shows up everywhere. You price your old car way higher than it's actually worth. You defend your playlist like it's a Grammy-winning album. You get personally offended when someone says your favorite hoodie is ugly. It's not about logic. It's about emotional attachment and that little voice in your head saying, but it's mine. Marketers know this too. That's why they'll say, try it free for 30 days. Because after 30 days, you'll feel like it's already yours. And once we own it, even temporarily, giving it up feels like a loss. Ready for number 30? It's a beautiful one to end on about how believing in someone can actually make them better. Let's wrap this round up with a banger, one that shows how expectation shapes reality. This one is quietly powerful. The Pygmalion Effect, 1968. This one was run by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson, and it all started with a simple question. What happens when you expect someone to succeed before they even show they can? So here's the setup. They went into an elementary school and gave students a test, nothing fancy. But then they randomly picked a few names and told the teachers, these kids? They're about to have a huge growth spurt in intelligence this year. Total lie. The students were chosen completely at random. But by the end of the year, Those kids actually scored higher on IQ tests. They improved more than their classmates. Why? Because the teachers believed in them. They gave them more attention, more feedback, more opportunities even without realizing it. This is the Pygmalion effect when higher expectations lead to better performance. Basically, if you treat someone like they're capable of greatness, they start to believe it too. It works in classrooms, relationships, even in management. Believe in someone and they might just rise to meet it. The Marshmallow Good Friday Experiment, 1962. This one sounds like the start of a movie. On Good Friday, in a church, people unknowingly take psychedelics and talk to God. And yeah, it actually happened. In 1962, Walter Pank, a Harvard psychologist and theology student, ran an experiment at the Marsh Chapel at Boston University. His goal? To test if psychedelics could trigger a genuine mystical or religious experience. Here's how it worked. 20 theology students were split into two groups. One got psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. The other? A placebo, niacin, which causes a mild body flush. Then they all sat in a church service. And the result? The psilocybin group had profound spiritual experiences. They described visions, unity with God, overwhelming peace, the kind of stuff monks and mystics talk about after years of meditation. Decades later, when researchers followed up, many of them still said it was one of the most meaningful moments of their entire lives. It was one of the earliest studies that scientifically explored spirituality through psychedelics. And now, 60+ years later, that same field is booming again. So yeah, sometimes a mushroom trip in church really can change your life. The Halo Effect study, 1977. Alright, so imagine this. You're watching a professor give a lecture. Same guy, same content, same accent. But in one version, he seems warm and friendly. In the other, he comes off as cold and distant. Now here's the kicker. After watching just a few minutes, people rated the warm professor as more attractive, smarter, and funnier, while the cold version got lower scores across the board. Same guy, different vibe, totally different ratings. This was the halo effect, studied by Richard Nisbett and Timothy DeCamp Wilson. It's a cognitive bias where one positive trait, like warmth or appearance, creates a halo that influences how we see everything else about a person. It works in reverse too. If someone seems cold or arrogant, we might assume they're also dumb or untrustworthy, even when they're not. This explains so much. Why charismatic people get away with more. Why we trust attractive strangers faster. Why first impressions are make or break. So next time you meet someone and instantly form a whole opinion about them, ask yourself, is that them or just the halo talking? The Halo Effect study, 1977. Alright, so imagine this, you're watching a professor give a lecture. Same guy, same content, same accent. But in one version, he seems warm and friendly. In the other, he comes off as cold and distant. Now here's the kicker. After watching just a few minutes, people rated the warm professor as more attractive, smarter, and funnier, while the cold version got lower scores across the board. Same guy, different vibe, totally different ratings. This was the halo effect, studied by Richard Nisbett and Timothy DeCamp Wilson. It's a cognitive bias where one positive trait, like warmth or appearance, creates a halo that influences how we see everything else about a person. It works in reverse too. If someone seems cold or arrogant, we might assume they're also dumb or untrustworthy, even when they're not. This explains so much. Why charismatic people get away with more. Why we trust attractive strangers faster. Why first impressions are make or break. So next time you meet someone and instantly form a whole opinion about them, ask yourself, is that them or just the halo talking? The Phantom Limb Mirror Box, 1990s. So here's the deal, when someone loses a limb like an arm or leg, sometimes they still feel it. It's called a phantom limb, and it can hurt, itch, cramp, or even feel like it's stuck in a painful position. But here's the crazy part. That pain isn't in the missing limb. It's happening entirely in the brain. Enter neuroscientist Vilayana Ramachandran in the 1990s. He had a wild idea. What if we could trick the brain into thinking the missing limb is still there? And okay? So he built a mirror box. The person puts their real hand into one side and their stump into the other. A mirror sits between them, reflecting the real hand, so it looks like they have two hands again. Then, they move the real hand. And the brain, it sees movement in the phantom hand and goes, "Oh cool, it's not stuck anymore." And just like that, the pain eases. This simple setup helped tons of amputees get relief, sometimes after years of suffering. And it also proved something huge. The brain isn't just passively recording reality. It's actively creating it. And with the right trick, you can rewrite the pain. Ramachandran's mirror box opened up a whole new way of thinking about neuroplasticity and how perception isn't just about what's there, but what the brain believes is there. The Prisoner's Dilemma, 1950s onward. This one isn't just a psychology experiment, it's a full-on strategy game that's been used in politics, economics, warfare, and yeah, psychology too. Here's the basic setup. Two people are arrested for a crime. They're put in separate rooms. No way to communicate. Each one is given a choice. Stay silent, cooperate, or betray the other, defect. And here's how it plays out. If both stay silent, short sentence for both. Best mutual outcome. If one betrays and the other stays silent, betrayer goes free, other gets full sentence, ouch. If both betray, medium sentence for both. Mutual screw up. So what do? Can you trust the other person? Or do you play it safe and sell them out? In experiments, people often betray, even when cooperation would have helped them both. Why? Because fear and self-interest kick in. What if they sell me out first? Researchers have run this with friends, strangers, teams, even countries, and it reveals so much about how humans handle trust, risk, and consequences. There's even a repeated version where players play over and over and patterns form. Some people always betray. Others start nice, then fight back. The most successful. Tit for tat. Start nice, then mirror what the other person does. It's not just theory. It mirrors real life. Should countries arm themselves or trust each other? Should you split the tip or let your friend cover it? Should you be honest in a relationship or play games first? It's not just a dilemma. It's a mirror into human nature. Fear conditioning with Little Peter, 1924. If Little Albert was the psychological horror story, Little Peter was the redemption arc. This one was done by Mary Cover Jones, a true pioneer in psychology, and honestly, she doesn't get nearly enough credit. So here's what happened. Little Peter was a young boy who had a fear of rabbits. Like, full-blown phobia. Just seeing one from a distance made him freak out. Mary Cover Jones wanted to see if that fear could be unlearned, using a technique now called desensitization. She started slow. Peter sat at a table, eating his favorite snacks, classic behavioral trick, positive reinforcement. Then she brought in a rabbit, but far away across the room. Over time, she moved the rabbit closer and closer, always while Peter was eating and calm. Eventually, he could sit next to it. Then touch it, then pet the fluffy little thing. Fear equals gone. It was the first real example of exposure therapy, the foundation of how we now treat phobias, anxiety, PTSD, and more. Where others were conditioning fear, Mary Cover Jones proved something better. You can train the brain to let go of fear with patience, kindness, and a bunny. The Tragedy of the Commons, 1968. Alright, this isn't a traditional experiment with participants in a lab. It's a thought experiment published by ecologist Garrett Hardin in 1968. But it hit hard and became one of the most important ideas in environmental psychology, economics, and social theory. Here's how it goes. Imagine a village with a big open pasture, the commons. Everyone in town can let their cows graze there. But the land can only handle so much before it gets destroyed. Now, every individual thinks, if I add just one more cow, I'll get more profit, and the land won't suffer that much. But the problem is, everyone thinks like that. So more cows get added. The land gets overgrazed. And eventually, the whole pasture collapses. Nobody wins. That's the tragedy of the commons. When individuals act in self-interest, it ends up hurting everyone, including themselves. It explains overfishing the oceans, deforestation, air pollution, climate change, even people leaving trash at festivals. The lesson? Without cooperation and regulation, shared resources are doomed. And the scariest part? Most of the world's biggest problems, from pollution to traffic to social media spam, are just modern versions of the same old tragedy. Facial feedback hypothesis, 1988. So here's the wild question researchers wanted to test. Can changing your face change your feelings? This experiment was run by Fritz Strack, Leonard Martin, and Sabine Stepper in 1988, and the setup was geniusly stupid in the best way. They had participants watch funny cartoons. But before that, they told them to do something super random. One group held a pen between their teeth, forcing a smile-beaming face with smiling eyes. Another held the pen between their lips, no smile-neutral face. Neither group knew the point of this. They just thought it was part of some motor task. Then they watched the cartoons and rated how funny they were. And guess what? The smiling group found the cartoons way funnier. Why? Because their face was already in a smile. And their brain went, "Oh, I must be enjoying this." This is the facial feedback hypothesis, the idea that your facial expression doesn't just reflect your mood, it affects it. So yeah, next time you're feeling meh, crack a fake smile, your brain might just follow the lead. Bonus: even faking confidence can sometimes make you actually feel more confident. It's all connected. The visual dominance effect, 1974, aka the Colavita effect. So back in the 1970s, researcher Francis Colavita wanted to see what happens when your eyes and ears compete for attention. Here's how it worked. Participants sat in front of a screen. They'd be shown a visual stimulus, like a flashing light, an auditory stimulus, like a beep, or both at the same time. Their job? React to whatever they got, and hit the right button depending on what they heard or saw. But here's the twist. When people got both at once, they almost always ignored the sound and only reacted to the visual one, even though they were supposed to respond to both. That's the visual dominance effect or Colavita effect, when your brain picks vision as the main sense, even if another sense is just as important or even more accurate. This shows up in real life all the time. Watching someone's mouth move helps you understand speech. You trust a chart more than a long explanation. If sound and vision clash, your eyes win. Why? Because your brain evolved to trust visual input first. Sight gives us the most detailed, fast, and spatially rich info, even if it's sometimes wrong. So yeah, your ears might be screaming, "Hey, something's off." But your eyes? They're like, "Nah, I got this." And your brain listens. The invisible rope experiment, pranks, and perception studies. So this one started as a prank, but it ended up becoming a real-life psychology demo of how powerful suggestion and expectation can be. Here's what happens. Two people stand on opposite sides of a sidewalk, street, or hallway. They pantomime pulling an invisible rope between them. Full body acting, tension, eye contact. No rope at all. Now here comes an unsuspecting pedestrian walking through, and what do? They stop. They step over it. They duck under it. They avoid it, even though there's nothing there. Why? Because our brains are wired to fill in the blanks. We take in the context. Two people pulling something, their posture, the tension, and our brain assumes there's a rope. It's the perfect example of social cues overriding logic, visual expectation creating false perception, and how belief shapes behavior even without proof. Psychologists have used versions of this to explore how people interpret nonverbal communication, body language, and the power of implied meaning. It's like your brain saying, "I didn't see it, but I must have seen it," and boom, you're stepping over air like it's solid. The False Confession Studies, 1996 plus, Saul Kassin. So get this, in the 1990s, psychologist Saul Kassin started digging into something terrifying. Why do innocent people confess to crimes they didn't commit? And the answer? Turns out, it's easier than you think. Here's one version of the study. Participants were told to type on a computer. Then suddenly, boom, the computer crashes. The researcher storms in like, "Did you press the wrong key? You broke it." Even if they didn't, the pressure ramps up. The authority figure insists. There's a fake witness. And eventually, many participants go, "Okay, yeah, I did it." They sign a confession. Some even believe they did it. Their memory literally starts to change. Kassin found that, under the right conditions, anyone can break. Long interrogations, leading questions, isolation, fake evidence. Real-life cases prove it too, from the Central Park Five to Brendan Dassey. False confessions are a real problem in criminal justice, and people have gone to prison or worse because of them. This research changed the way lawyers, cops, and courts view confessions. Because if you pressure someone enough, they'll say anything, even if it costs them their freedom. These experiments didn't just reveal how we think, feel, and behave, they exposed the layers of the human mind. If you made it this far, your brain's probably spinning, mine too. Hit that like button, subscribe for more mind-bending content, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious. And remember, understanding your mind is the first step to mastering it.